Africa's frenemies, a continental countdown. All right, so picture this. You've got neighbors, right? Sometimes they borrow sugar, sometimes they borrow your lawnmower and forget to return it, and sometimes they're arguing over whose tree is dropping leaves into whose yard. Now scale that up, way up, to entire countries, and you've got a glimpse into the complex world of international relations. Welcome to our countdown of the top 10 rival countries and their contentions in Africa. It's a continent bursting with diversity, innovation, and yes, like any large, dynamic family, its fair share of disagreements. We're not just talking about who has the best jollof rice, though that can get pretty heated, trust me. We're diving deep into some serious stuff, from border disputes that have simmered for generations, sometimes boiling over, to resource conflicts where the stakes are incredibly high. Think water, oil, diamonds, things that can make or break a nation's future. We'll explore the key issues fueling these rivalries, looking at the history, the politics, and the very real human impact. It's important to understand these dynamics, not just for Africa, but for the world, because what happens in Africa doesn't just stay in Africa, it has ripples across the globe. So, grab your metaphorical popcorn or maybe a cup of rooibos tea, because we're about to unpack some of the continent's most significant and often misunderstood face-offs. The goal here isn't to pick sides or declare winners and losers. It's about understanding the why behind the headlines. Why do these tensions persist? What are the underlying factors that keep these rivalries alive, and in some cases, escalate them? We'll look at historical legacies, the scramble for resources in a rapidly changing world, political ambitions, and the quest for regional influence. It's a tangled web for sure, but by shining a light on these contentions, we can get a clearer picture of the challenges and, hopefully, the potential paths towards resolution. Because understanding is the first step to, well, anything better. First up on our list, we head to the Horn of Africa, a region that's seen more than its fair share of drama, to look at Ethiopia and Eritrea. Now, these two countries, they're like brothers who had a massive falling out. I mean, they were once part of the same country, with Eritrea being a province of Ethiopia. But after a brutal 30-year war for independence, Eritrea finally broke away in 1993. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Okay, you get your own room, I get mine. We good? But nope, that's often when the arguments start, especially when you can't agree on where the line for that room actually is. The main bone of contention for decades was the border, specifically a dusty little town called Badme. It might not look like much on a map, but it became a symbol of national pride and sovereignty for both sides. This dispute led to a devastating war from 1998 to 2000, costing tens of thousands of lives and displacing countless more. It was a tragic conflict between nations with deep historical, cultural, and even familial ties. Imagine fighting a war where the person on the other side could literally be your cousin. It's that kind of deep, painful division we're talking about here. A wound that festered for years, creating a heavily militarized border and a chillingly cold peace. For nearly 2 decades after the war, it was a stalemate. Diplomatic relations were severed, borders were closed, and the tension was so thick you could cut it with an injera knife. Families were split, trade was crippled, and both nations poured enormous resources into their militaries. Resources that could have gone into development, education, or healthcare. It was a classic case of a frozen conflict, a no war, no peace situation that held back the entire region. Think of it like a really, really long silent treatment, but with armies staring each other down. It's the kind of standoff that drains everyone involved, leaving little room for progress or cooperation on other pressing issues. Then, in 2018, something remarkable happened. A new Prime Minister in Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, extended an olive branch. He announced Ethiopia would accept the 2002 Border Commission ruling, which had awarded Badme to Eritrea and cede the disputed territories. This was huge. It was like your sibling finally admitting you were right about that argument from 20 years ago. The Eritrean president, Isaias Afwerki, reciprocated, and suddenly there were direct flights, reopened embassies, and emotional family reunions. It was a moment of incredible hope, and Abiy Ahmed even won the Nobel Peace Prize for it. The world watched, thinking, wow, maybe this is actually it. However, the story doesn't quite end there with a perfect Hollywood handshake. While the peace deal was a monumental step, the relationship has since faced new complexities, especially with the internal conflict in Ethiopia's Tigray region, which borders Eritrea. Eritrea became involved in that conflict, adding another layer to an already intricate regional dynamic. So, while the direct border war is over, the path to a truly stable and cooperative long-term peace is still being navigated. It's a reminder that peace isn't just the absence of war, it's an ongoing process of building trust and resolving new challenges as they arise. It's like finally making up, but then having to figure out how to be actual friends again. Next, we journey to North Africa, to a rivalry that's as much about regional dominance as it is about a specific piece of land, Morocco versus Algeria. These are two of the continent's heavyweights, sharing a massive border, a rich history, and unfortunately, a decades-long Cold War that casts a long shadow over the Maghreb. Their relationship is like that of two powerful CEOs constantly trying to outmaneuver each other in the same market. And the market, in this case, involves influence, resources, and a very large disputed territory known as Western Sahara. At the heart of their animosity is the Western Sahara, a former Spanish colony that Morocco annexed in 1975. Morocco claims it as its southern provinces, citing historical ties. However, Algeria has been the staunchest supporter of the Polisario Front, an independence movement that seeks to establish an independent Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic in the territory. Algeria doesn't claim the territory for itself, but its backing of the Polisario, including hosting Sahrawi refugee camps on its soil for decades, has been a major thorn in Morocco's side. This isn't just a disagreement, it's a fundamental clash of ideologies and national interests. This dispute has effectively frozen regional integration. The Arab Maghreb Union, which includes Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Mauritania, has been largely paralyzed because of this feud. Borders between Morocco and Algeria have been closed for much of the past few decades, crippling trade and people-to-people connections. Imagine having a neighbor you don't talk to, but that neighbor also controls a key road you need to use. It's that level of dysfunction. Both nations have also engaged in a significant arms race, diverting billions into military spending that again could have been used for domestic development. The suspicion runs deep, affecting everything from diplomatic initiatives to economic cooperation. The Western Sahara issue is incredibly complex, with international law, self-determination and territorial integrity all being debated. Morocco has invested heavily in the Western Sahara, building infrastructure and encouraging settlement, while the Polisario Front, with Algerian support, has maintained its claim and engaged in sporadic conflict. Numerous UN-led efforts to find a lasting solution, often involving a referendum on self-determination, have stalled. Morocco offers autonomy under its sovereignty, which the Polisario and Algeria reject. It's a diplomatic quagmire, a seemingly intractable problem that has defined North African geopolitics for nearly half a century. Recently, tensions have spiked again. Algeria cut diplomatic ties with Morocco in 2021, citing a series of hostile acts. The situation remains incredibly tense, with implications for regional stability, counter-terrorism efforts in the Sahel, and even energy politics, as a major gas pipeline that ran from Algeria through Morocco to Spain had its contract expire amidst these renewed hostilities. This isn't just a localized spat, it's a rivalry that shapes the strategic landscape of North Africa and the Sahel, making it a critical point of contention on the continent, a slow-burning fire that occasionally flares up, reminding everyone of its unresolved nature. Let's move east to Sudan and South Sudan. A story of what happens when a country splits in two, but the baggage doesn't get neatly divided. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011 after decades of brutal civil war. It was a moment of immense hope, the birth of the world's newest nation. But like many divorces, especially those involving valuable assets, the separation was far from amicable, and new conflicts quickly emerged, primarily over oil, the lifeblood of both economies, and poorly defined borders. The crux of the issue is that when South Sudan seceded, it took about 75% of the formerly united Sudan's oil reserves with it. However, and this is a big however, that the pipelines, refineries and the port to export that oil all remained in Sudan. So you have one country with the oil and another with the means to get it to market. It's like one roommate owning the only TV and the other owning the only remote. You can see how that might lead to some disagreements, especially when it comes to transit fees and revenue sharing. This dependency created immediate friction and mistrust. The disagreements over oil transit fees escalated dramatically. At one point, South Sudan, accusing Sudan of stealing its oil by diverting it and charging exorbitant fees, shut down its entire oil production in 2012. This was a catastrophic move for both economies, which are overwhelmingly reliant on oil revenue. It was a game of economic chicken, and both sides suffered immensely. Beyond oil, there's the issue of the border itself. Several areas along the roughly 2,000-kilometer boundary remain contested, most notably the Abyei region, an oil-rich area claimed by both sides. Abyei was supposed to have a referendum to decide its fate, but disagreements over voter eligibility have stalled it indefinitely. These border disputes aren't just lines on a map. They often involve communities with cross-border ethnic ties, access to water and grazing lands, and of course those valuable natural resources. The lack of clear demarcation has led to sporadic clashes between the two militaries and armed groups, further destabilizing an already fragile region. Both countries have also accused each other of supporting rebel groups in their respective territories, a common tactic in these kinds of rivalries, adding fuel to the fire and making it harder to build any kind of lasting trust. It's like they broke up, but keep trying to sabotage each other's new relationships. While there have been periods of tentative cooperation, particularly when global oil prices are low and both need the revenue, the underlying issues of mistrust, border demarcation, and resource sharing remain deeply entrenched. South Sudan has also been plagued by its own internal civil war since 2013, which has further complicated its relationship with Sudan. The stability of one is intrinsically linked to the stability of the other. This rivalry is a stark reminder that political separation doesn't automatically resolve underlying economic and territorial dependencies, and forging a peaceful coexistence requires sustained effort and compromise from both sides. Chapter 4, Egypt versus Ethiopia, the Nile River's high-stakes dam drama. Now let's talk about water, specifically the Nile River, the lifeblood for millions. This brings us to a colossal dispute between Egypt and Ethiopia, two ancient civilizations now locked in a modern battle over the grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD. Egypt, which lies downstream, has relied on the Nile's waters for millennia. Its agriculture, its population, its very existence is tied to this river. Herodotus famously called Egypt the gift of the Nile, and they haven't forgotten it. For them, any threat to the Nile's flow is an existential one. Ethiopia, on the other hand, is one of the Nile's primary sources, with the Blue Nile originating in its highlands and contributing over 80% of the Nile's water during the rainy season. For Ethiopia, the GERD is a flagship development project, a symbol of national pride and a critical source of much-needed electricity for its growing population and economy. They see it as their sovereign right to utilize their natural resources for development, just like any other nation. The dam, one of the largest in Africa, promises to transform Ethiopia's energy landscape and potentially make it a major power exporter. The problem is, how do you fill and operate a massive dam upstream without significantly impacting the water flow to countries downstream, particularly Egypt and, to a lesser extent, Sudan? Egypt fears that a rapid filling of the GERD's reservoir, especially during drought years, could drastically reduce its water supply, devastating its agriculture and impacting its water security. They point to historical treaties which they argue grant them a significant share of the Nile's waters, treaties that Ethiopia says it was not a party to and does not recognize as binding in the same way. It's a clash of hydro-hegemony versus hydro-sovereignty. Years of negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan, also a key Nile Basin country, have failed to produce a legally binding agreement on the filling and operation of the dam. There have been talks mediated by the African Union, the United States and others, but a comprehensive deal remains elusive. Ethiopia has proceeded with filling the dam, arguing it needs to start generating electricity, while Egypt has called this a violation of international principles and has even made veiled threats of military action in the past, though diplomatic solutions are still being pursued. The rhetoric can get very heated because for both sides the stakes are incredibly high. This isn't just about water, it's about regional power dynamics, economic development and national identity. The GERD dispute highlights the challenges of managing shared transboundary water resources in an era of climate change and growing populations. Finding a cooperative agreement that balances Ethiopia's development needs with Egypt's and Sudan's water security is crucial for the stability of the entire Nile Basin region. It's a test case for whether upstream and downstream nations can share a vital, finite resource without resorting to conflict. The world is watching this one very closely, because water wars are a scary prospect nobody wants to see become a reality. Chapter 5, Nigeria versus Cameroon, the Bakassi Peninsula verdict. Let's head over to West Africa, where we find a rivalry that, thankfully, has seen a degree of resolution, though not without its share of tension: Nigeria and Cameroon over the Bakassi Peninsula. Now, this peninsula, located in the Gulf of Guinea, might not be a household name for everyone, but it's rich in oil and fish, and for decades, both Nigeria and Cameroon laid claim to it. It's like finding a wallet full of cash on the street and two people insist it's theirs. Things can get complicated fast, especially when that wallet also involves national territory and resources. The dispute over Bakassi has deep historical roots, stemming from colonial-era treaties between Britain and Germany. Nigeria, a former British colony, and Cameroon, parts of which were German and then French and British trust territories, inherited these somewhat ambiguous borders. For years, the peninsula was administered by Nigeria, and its population was predominantly Nigerian. However, Cameroon consistently maintained its claim based on those early 20th century agreements. This led to several military clashes and skirmishes, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s, raising fears of a larger conflict between two of West Africa's most populous and influential nations. The turning point came when Cameroon took the case to the International Court of Justice, ICJ, in The Hague in 1994. After 8 years of legal arguments and deliberation, the ICJ delivered its verdict in 2002, ruling that sovereignty over the Bakassi Peninsula belonged to Cameroon. This was a landmark decision. Now, you might expect the losing side, especially a regional power like Nigeria, to perhaps, shall we say, disagree strongly with the outcome. And initially, there was significant domestic opposition in Nigeria to ceding the territory, particularly given the Nigerian population living there. However, in a move that was widely praised internationally, Nigeria, under then-President Olusegun Obasanjo, eventually agreed to abide by the ICJ's ruling. This was a significant moment for African diplomacy and the peaceful resolution of disputes. The formal handover of the territory was completed in stages, culminating in 2008. It wasn't without its challenges. There were concerns about the rights of the Nigerian residents who wished to remain, and some militant groups in the Niger Delta region, which is adjacent to Bakassi, opposed the handover, but overall it was seen as a victory for international law. While the sovereignty issue is largely settled, the Bakassi story isn't completely closed. There have been ongoing concerns about the treatment of Nigerians still living in the peninsula under Cameroonian rule, and maritime boundary delimitation in the oil-rich waters surrounding Bakassi also required further agreements. Nevertheless, the peaceful resolution of the territorial dispute itself stands as a positive example on a continent where border conflicts can often fester for generations. It shows that even deeply entrenched rivalries over valuable land can be resolved through legal mechanisms and political will, though the aftermath always requires careful management and continued dialogue. Chapter 6. Rwanda versus Uganda, brothers in arms to wary neighbors. Now for a rivalry that's particularly complex because it involves two countries whose leaders were once close allies, almost brothers in arms, Rwanda and Uganda. President Paul Kagame of Rwanda and President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda were key figures in each other's rise to power. Kagame and many Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF soldiers, fought alongside Museveni's National Resistance Army in Uganda, and Museveni later supported the RPF's campaign that ended the Rwandan genocide in 1994. You'd think this shared history would forge an unbreakable bond, but, as often happens in politics, shared revolutionary pasts don't always guarantee future harmony. Over the years, the relationship between Rwanda and Uganda has soured dramatically, marked by deep mistrust, accusations of espionage, and support for rival proxy forces, particularly in the volatile Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. It's like two best friends who started a successful company together only to end up as bitter rivals competing for the same contracts and accusing each other of stealing clients. The stakes, of course, are much higher here, involving regional stability and human lives. The tensions have manifested in various ways. There have been border closures, notably the Gatuna-Katuna border post, a crucial trade link which was closed for several years, severely impacting local economies and regional trade. Both countries have repeatedly accused each other of arbitrary arrests, detention, and even torture of their citizens. Furthermore, there have been persistent allegations from each side that the other is harboring, training, or supporting dissidents and rebel groups aiming to destabilize their neighbor. These are serious charges that create a climate of fear and suspicion, making any genuine reconciliation incredibly difficult. The roots of this fallout are multifaceted. Some analysts point to diverging strategic interests in the Great Lakes region, particularly concerning the vast mineral wealth of the eastern DRC. Others suggest it's a clash of personalities between two strong leaders, or a competition for regional influence. Whatever the exact combination of causes, the result has been a dangerous Cold War dynamic that has, at times, even spilled over into direct military confrontation between their armies, when both were involved in conflicts within the DRC in the late 1990s and early 2000s. A truly shocking turn of events for former allies. There have been attempts at mediation facilitated by other regional leaders, and some positive signs, like the reopening of the Gatuna border in early 2022. However, the underlying mistrust seems to persist. This rivalry is particularly concerning because both Rwanda and Uganda play significant roles in the security and politics of the African Great Lakes region. Their animosity has the potential to destabilize an already fragile area, undermining efforts to bring peace and development. It's a stark reminder that even the closest of alliances can fracture when national interests and leadership ambitions diverge. Chapter 7. Kenya versus Somalia. Troubled waters in the Indian Ocean. Let's turn our attention to the East African coast, where a significant maritime boundary dispute has strained relations between Kenya and Somalia. This isn't about a dusty patch of land, it's about a potentially lucrative slice of the Indian Ocean, believed to be rich in oil and gas deposits. When there's talk of underwater treasure, you can bet your bottom dollar or shilling that neighbors are going to pay very close attention to where the property line is drawn, especially when that line could mean billions in revenue. The dispute centers on how their maritime border should extend from their land boundary out into the Indian Ocean. Somalia argued for a line that continues equidistantly from their shared land border in a southeasterly direction. Kenya, on the other hand, contended that the border should run in a straight line horizontally, eastwards, along a parallel of latitude. The difference between these two interpretations carves out a triangular area of over 100,000 square kilometers of ocean, and that's the prize they were both after. It's like arguing over how to slice a pizza, but the pizza is made of potential oil blocks. This disagreement simmered for years, but it escalated when Somalia took Kenya to the International Court of Justice in 2014, seeking a ruling on the delimitation. Kenya initially participated in the ICJ proceedings, but later withdrew, questioning the court's jurisdiction and impartiality. This added another layer of diplomatic tension to an already complex relationship. Kenya has been a key partner in the fight against al-Shabaab militants in Somalia, contributing troops to the African Union mission in Somalia, now ATMIs. So this maritime dispute created an awkward situation where they were security partners on land but legal adversaries at sea. In October 2021, the ICJ largely ruled in favor of Somalia's claim, adjusting the maritime boundary line, though not entirely along the line Somalia had proposed. It awarded Somalia a significant portion of the disputed territory. Somalia naturally welcomed the ruling as a victory for international law and fairness. Kenya, however, reiterated its rejection of the ICJ's jurisdiction and the judgment itself, stating it would not cede any territory and would find its own ways to protect its interests. This created a period of uncertainty and heightened rhetoric between the two nations. While the ICJ ruling is legally binding, its enforcement relies on the willingness of states to comply. The aftermath has seen both countries express a desire for diplomatic engagement, but the core disagreement over the judgment's validity from Kenya's perspective remains a point of friction. This dispute is not just about potential oil and gas, it's also about national pride, sovereign rights over maritime resources, and the broader relationship between two key East African neighbors. How they navigate this post-judgment phase will be crucial for regional stability and their long-standing, albeit often complicated, partnership. Chapter 8. We now shift our focus to the Sahel region, an area facing immense security challenges, to look at the relationship between Mali and Burkina Faso. This isn't a classic rivalry over territory or resources in the way some others on our list are. Instead, it's a relationship profoundly shaped by shared threats, primarily cross-border terrorism and insurgency, and more recently by similar political trajectories involving military coups and a re-evaluation of traditional international partnerships, especially with France. Both Mali and Burkina Faso, along with their neighbor Niger, have been at the epicenter of a worsening security crisis in the Sahel, fueled by jihadist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, as well as ethnic militias and criminal networks. These groups operate across porous borders, launching attacks, displacing populations, and undermining state authority. For years, the primary dynamic was one of forced cooperation against a common enemy, often under the umbrella of regional initiatives like the G5 Sahel Force and with significant international military support. However, the political landscape in both countries has shifted dramatically. Both Mali, starting in 2020, and Burkina Faso in 2022 experienced military coups that brought new leadership to power. These new regimes have expressed frustration with previous counter-terrorism strategies and have sought to assert greater national sovereignty. This has included a significant pivot away from France, the former colonial power and a key security partner. And, in Mali's case, an increasing reliance on Russian Wagner Group mercenaries, a move that has drawn international condemnation and complicated regional security dynamics. This shared experience of military takeovers and a more assertive anti-French stance has, in some ways, brought the current leaderships of Mali and Burkina Faso closer together. They have formed a sort of informal alliance along with Niger, which also experienced a coup in 2023, often defending each other's legitimacy on the international stage and coordinating their foreign policies. For instance, when the Economic Community of West African States, or ECOWAS, imposed sanctions on Mali after its coups, Burkina Faso's then military government expressed solidarity. This is a new kind of alignment, born out of shared circumstances and a desire to break from past dependencies. So, while not a rivalry in the traditional sense, the relationship is complex and critical. Their cooperation, or lack thereof, in managing the vast, ungoverned spaces along their shared border is crucial for regional stability. If they work together effectively, they can present a more robust front against insurgents. If their internal political situations lead to further instability or conflicting security approaches, it could create even more space for extremist groups to thrive. The rivalry here is perhaps less between the states themselves and more a shared struggle against internal and external pressures, with their alliance being a strategic response to those pressures. The long-term implications of this evolving relationship are still unfolding. Chapter 9. Our penultimate stop takes us to Central and Southern Africa, to the often tense relationship between Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC. These two giants share a massive porous border over 2,500 kilometers long and a history intertwined by conflict, refugees, and valuable natural resources, particularly diamonds and oil. While they are often diplomatic partners on the surface, undercurrents of suspicion and competition have frequently characterized their interactions. It's like two powerful neighbors who smile at each other over the fence but are keenly aware of what the other is doing in their backyard. A significant source of tension has been the cross-border movement of people and resources. The DRC's Kasai region, bordering Angola, is rich in diamonds, and for years there have been issues with informal, often illicit diamond mining and smuggling. Angola has, at various times, expelled large numbers of Congolese migrants, many of whom were working in its diamond mining areas, citing security concerns and efforts to formalize its diamond sector. These expulsions have often been criticized for alleged human rights abuses and have created humanitarian crises, straining relations with the DRC government. Beyond diamonds, there's also offshore oil. Both countries have Atlantic coastlines, and there have been disputes over the delimitation of their maritime boundary, which affects access to potentially lucrative offshore oil blocks. While some agreements have been reached, the potential for future disagreements over shared or adjacent undersea resources remains. Angola, with its more established oil industry, has often been seen as having an upper hand in these negotiations, which can breed resentment. The lure of black gold has a way of complicating even the friendliest of neighborly chats. Furthermore, Angola has historically played a significant and sometimes interventionist role in DRC politics, particularly during the Congo Wars of the late 1990s and early 2000s. Angola intervened militarily to support the Kabila governments, both Laurent and Joseph, against rebel groups, some of which were backed by Rwanda and Uganda. While this intervention was ostensibly to stabilize its volatile neighbor and protect its own security interests, preventing rebel groups from using DRC as a rear base, it also cemented Angola's position as a regional power broker, a role that can sometimes chafe with the DRC's own aspirations for sovereignty and influence. In more recent years, Angola has taken on a more prominent diplomatic role, often mediating in conflicts within the Great Lakes region, including those involving the DRC. Angolan President João Lourenço has been active in trying to broker peace between the DRC and Rwanda. This positions Angola as a key player in regional stability, but it also means navigating complex relationships where it has its own historical baggage and strategic interests. The Angola-DRC relationship is therefore a delicate balancing act of cooperation on some fronts, like regional security initiatives and underlying competition or friction on others, particularly concerning resources and border management. Chapter 10. Finally, we head down south to a rivalry that might seem less explosive than some others, but highlights different kinds of cross-border challenges: Zimbabwe and Botswana. These two neighbors share a long border, and while they haven't gone to war, their relationship has been marked by persistent low-level tensions, primarily related to border disputes, undocumented migration, livestock rustling, and, interestingly, wildlife conservation issues, particularly involving elephants. It's like a neighborhood dispute that's more about fences and stray animals than outright brawls, but still causes plenty of headaches. One of the most visible symbols of their sometimes strained relations has been Botswana's construction of electric fences along parts of its border with Zimbabwe. Botswana stated these fences were primarily to control the spread of foot and mouth disease from Zimbabwean cattle into its own prized beef industry, which is a major export earner. However, many in Zimbabwe saw the fences as an unwelcoming gesture, aimed at curbing the flow of undocumented Zimbabwean migrants seeking economic opportunities in relatively more prosperous Botswana, especially during periods of severe economic hardship in Zimbabwe. The issue of Zimbabwean migrants in Botswana has been a recurring point of friction. Botswana has often deported large numbers of Zimbabweans, and there have been allegations of mistreatment which Botswana denies. This migration is largely driven by economic disparities between the two countries. When Zimbabwe's economy has struggled, Botswana has been a natural magnet for those seeking work. This creates social and economic pressures in Botswana and diplomatic tension with Zimbabwe. It's a classic push-pull dynamic that many neighboring countries with differing economic fortunes experience. Then there's the wildlife. The border area is rich in wildlife, and both countries are home to significant elephant populations. Differences in conservation policies and approaches to human-wildlife conflict have sometimes led to disagreements. For instance, Botswana had a hunting ban for several years, though it has since been lifted, while Zimbabwe has maintained trophy hunting. Cross-border poaching and the movement of large animal herds like elephants, which don't recognize international boundaries, also require coordinated management, which can be challenging when diplomatic relations are cool. Elephants damaging fences or crops on either side can easily become a bilateral issue. While not on the scale of armed conflict, these persistent issues, border control, migration, resource management, in this case pasture and cattle, and wildlife, create a relationship that requires constant management and dialogue. There have been joint commissions and efforts to address these matters, but the underlying economic pressures and differing national priorities mean that small irritants can easily become larger diplomatic spats. It underscores how even seemingly softer issues can define the day-to-day reality of relations between neighboring African states, especially when livelihoods and national resources are at stake. And there you have it, a whirlwind tour of 10 significant rivalries shaping the African continent. From the Horn to the Sahel, from disputes over ancient rivers to modern maritime boundaries, the complexities are undeniable. These aren't just abstract political chess games, they involve real people, real resources, and have very real consequences for peace, development, and the future of millions. Understanding these dynamics is crucial, not just for those living in Africa, but for anyone interested in global affairs. Because a more stable and prosperous Africa benefits the entire world. What we've seen is that these contentions are rarely about just one thing. They're a mix of history, identity, economics, security, and the timeless pursuit of national interest. But we've also seen examples of resolution, like the Bakassi Peninsula, and moments of incredible hope, like the initial Ethiopia-Eritrea peace deal. It shows that even the most entrenched disputes aren't necessarily permanent. Diplomacy, international law, and a genuine will for peace can make a difference. It's a long road, often with setbacks, but the effort is always worthwhile. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative and hopefully a little bit enlightening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content where we try to make sense of this complicated world. We want to keep these conversations going. Let us know in the comments which rivalries you think are the most significant in Africa, or perhaps if there are others you think we should have covered. Your insights are always welcome because the more we talk and learn, the better equipped we are to understand. Stay curious, everyone.